need to explain how 911 dispatch works before any of this will make sense. And I need to explain it honestly, not the way it looks on television. You sit in a room. The room has no windows, by design. There are between 4 and 12 consoles, depending on the size of your center, and each console has between 2 and 6 monitors. And on those monitors, you have your CAD system, your radio channels, your phone interface, your mapping overlay, and whatever else your county has budgeted for, which in Pershing County, Nevada, is not much. The chair is bad, the coffee is worse. The overhead lighting is the kind that makes everyone look like they're already dead, which is a joke dispatchers make until they stop making it, which takes about 8 months. Your job is to answer the phone, determine the nature of the emergency, enter it into CAD, and dispatch the appropriate unit. You are the first point of contact between a person in crisis and the system that is supposed to help them. You are not a first responder. You are the person who sends first responders. The distinction matters legally, professionally, and psychologically because it means that everything you know about what's happening, you know through a screen or a voice. You are never there. You are always hearing about there. I've been dispatching for 11 years. Pershing County Communications Center, Lovelock, Nevada. Population of the county is around 6,000, spread across roughly 6,000 square miles, which means each person gets a square mile to themselves. If you distribute them evenly, which you can't because most of the county is Bureau of Land Management desert, dry lake beds, to mountain ranges that don't have names unless you're a rancher or a geologist, and 2-lane highways that run so straight and so long that driving them at night feels like being fed into something. We run 2 dispatchers per shift. Day shift is busy in the way small counties are busy: traffic stops, medical calls, the occasional domestic, a lot of ranch land fence disputes that somehow become law enforcement matters. Swing shift is slower. Overnight is mine. I chose overnight 11 years ago. I've stayed on overnight because I'm good at it and because the quiet suits me and because this is the honest reason. I prefer a job where the technically correct answer to "what did you do today?" is I sat in a room and mostly nothing happened. My ex-husband found this depressing. I find it structurally clear. You sit, you wait. It's when the phone rings, you answer it. When it doesn't, you maintain your awareness. You check your systems. You drink your coffee. And you exist in a room with no windows and know that your purpose is to be available. My overnight partner for the past 6 years has been Dale Reeves. Dale is 57, ex-Navy, built like a filing cabinet, and speaks about 11 words per shift, unless something is happening. We are not friends in the way civilians understand friendship. We are 2 people who have sat in a room together for approximately 9,000 hours and developed a mutual communication system that operates primarily through posture, keystroke rhythm, and the specific way one of us will roll a chair back from the console, which means I need you to look at this. Dale rolled his chair back on a Tuesday in October, and I know it was a Tuesday because our call volume logs are time-stamped, and I've since gone through them carefully. It was 2:47 a.m. "Allison," he said, "come look at this." Dale's CAD screen was showing an active call. The ANI/ALI display, that's the automatic number and location identification that populates when a 911 call connects, was filled in. There was a callback number. There was an address. The caller's voice was audible through Dale's headset, which he'd pulled down around his neck, letting the audio bleed into the room at low volume. A woman's voice. Calm. Not whispering, but quiet. "I can't dispatch this," Dale said. I looked at the address field. It read, 14 Uranium Street, Toulon, Nevada, 89429. "Toulon doesn't have a Uranium Street," I said. "Toulon doesn't have any streets," Dale said. He was right. Toulon, Nevada, is an unincorporated community about 40 miles south of Lovelock, on the edge of the Humboldt Sink. It appears on some maps. There are a handful of structures, a couple of ranches, some BLM access roads, the remnants of a railroad siding. It does not have a street grid. It does not have named streets. It does not have a number 14 of anything. "What's she saying?" I asked. Dale put the headset back on. He listened for about 15 seconds. Then he typed into the call notes. "Caller reports smoke in structure. Requests fire response. Calm, oriented, no signs of distress. Address does not resolve in GIS. No matching structure in county parcel database." "She says there's smoke coming from under the floor," Dale said. "She's asking for the fire department." "Can you get a GPS coordinate off the callback number?" Dale tried. The system returned a coordinate that placed the call in the center of the Humboldt Sink, which is a dry lake bed. No structures, no roads, no habitation within 6 miles. "Phase 2? Location's no good," he said. "She's either on a landline that doesn't exist or a cell tower's lying to us." I pulled up the mapping overlay on my own console. I typed in Toulon and zoomed. The GIS layer showed what it always shows. Terrain, BLM boundaries, a couple of parcel lines for the ranches, Highway 399, the railroad right-of-way. No Uranium Street, no grid. "How long has she been on the line?" I asked. 7 minutes. She called in, gave the address, described the smoke. I asked for cross streets. She said Uranium and Mill. I asked for a callback number. She gave me this one. He pointed at the ANI display, and the number had a 775 area code, Northern Nevada. "I've been trying to get a better location for the last 4 minutes. Is she still on the line?" Dale nodded. I leaned in. Through his headset, tinny and thin, I could hear the woman breathing. Then, "Hello? Is someone coming?" Dale keyed in. "Ma'am, we're working on getting a unit to your location. Can you tell me what you see right now?" "The smoke is heavier. It's coming through the seams in the floorboards." I moved to the kitchen. The children are with me. "How many children, ma'am?" 3, all under 10. "Ma'am, can you exit the structure?" A pause. Then, "I'd rather wait for the fire department." "Ma'am, if there is smoke in the structure, I need you to evacuate with your children. It's cold outside. And the smoke isn't bad yet. It's just, it smells wrong." Dale looked at me. I knew the look. It was the look that means, I have a caller who needs help and no way to send it. "Put her on hold," I said. "Let me call Pershing County Sheriff's non-emergency and see if they can get a deputy to drive down 399 and look for a structure near Toulon." "There's nothing near Toulon." "Then the deputy will confirm that and we'll know we have a bad address." Dale nodded. I made the call. Deputy Mike Arellano was on patrol near Imlay. He said he'd drive south. It would take about 40 minutes. Dale stayed on the line with the woman. I monitored from my console. Over the next 20 minutes, the conversation continued. The woman was calm, specific, and consistent. She described a 2-story wood frame house, She described the smell of the smoke as chemical, sweet, not like wood. She described her children by name: Peter, Anna, and Grace. She said her husband was at work. She said the house was old and the wiring was bad, and she'd been telling someone about it for months. At 3:31 a.m., the line disconnected. Dale tried the callback number, out of service. Not disconnected. The system returned a fast busy, which in telephony terms means the number is not reachable, not that it has been hung up. Dale tried twice more. Same result. At 4:14 a.m., Deputy Arellano radioed in from the Toulon area. He'd driven every accessible road within a 5-mile radius. No structures matching the description, no smoke, no fire, no people. He said the only thing he saw was the old railroad grade and a lot of sagebrush. We classified the call as unable to locate / possible equipment error and moved on. That is the correct procedure. When a call cannot be verified, cannot be located, and cannot be called back, and a field unit confirms no emergency at the approximate location, you close the event, you log it, you move on. The system does not have a code for the caller was real, but the place was not. It has a code for equipment error, and that is what we used. Dale and I didn't talk about it for the rest of the shift. We didn't talk about it the next night either. There was nothing to talk about. Strange calls happen. People give wrong addresses. Cell towers triangulate badly in rural Nevada. The coverage geometry is terrible. The terrain reflects signals off mountain ranges, and a caller can appear to be 15 miles from where they actually are. It was a strange call. We handled it correctly. We sent a deputy. The deputy found nothing. 3 weeks later, it happened again. Different caller. Male, elderly, difficulty breathing. Address given as 7 Mill Street, Toulon, Nevada 89429. Mill Street, the cross street the first caller had mentioned. Same GIS result. No such address, no such street. Coordinate resolution in the Humboldt Sink. The man described chest pain, said his wife was trying to find the aspirin, said the nearest hospital was in Lovelock, and he didn't think he could drive. Dale dispatched Pershing County EMS to the Toulon area. They found nothing. The call disconnected after 9 minutes. Callback number, out of service. I pulled the first call's log and compared. The callback numbers were different, but both had 775 area codes and both returned fast busy on redial. The addresses shared a street name, Mill. The callers were different genders, different ages, different emergencies, but the location was the same impossible place. And I did something I don't normally do. I opened the county's historical call archive. We keep 7 years of call data on the local server, and older records are backed up to the state system. And I searched for any call with Toulon in the address field. There were 14 calls over the past 6 years, all originating from addresses in Toulon that do not exist. All with callback numbers that returned fast busy, all classified as equipment error, all with field units dispatched and finding nothing. 6 different callers, 4 different street names: uranium, mill, copper, and Paiute. Structure fires, medical emergencies, a domestic disturbance, a report of a child missing from a yard, a gas leak. 14 calls, and every one of them had been handled exactly the way Dale and I handled ours. Dispatched. Unable to locate. Name classified. Closed. I printed the logs. I put them in a folder. I didn't show them to Dale because I was not yet sure what I was looking at. And Dale is the kind of person who requires you to know what you're looking at before you show it to him. Instead, I drove to Toulon on my day off. I want to describe what Toulon, Nevada looks like because the contrast matters. You drive south from Lovelock on 399 and the land opens into the kind of basin that makes you understand why people thought the West was empty. It isn't empty, it's full of sagebrush and alkali and heat shimmer and sky. But the human imprint is so faint that your eyes stop looking for it after 10 minutes. Toulon is marked by a small green highway sign that says Toulon and nothing else. There is no town. There is no intersection. At deck there is a dirt road that leads east toward the Humboldt Sink and a couple of ranch access roads gated with cattle guards. I drove every road I could find. I got out of my car at 3 different points and walked. I found no foundations, no streets, no evidence of a grid. I found one thing. About 2 miles east of the highway sign, on a slight rise above the sink, I found a rectangular depression in the ground, maybe 50 feet by 30. The sagebrush inside it was shorter and a different color than the surrounding brush. Lighter, drier, as if the soil composition was different. I am not an archaeologist. I am a 911 dispatcher. But I've lived in northern Nevada my entire life, and I know what a building footprint looks like when the building has been gone long enough for the ground to almost forget it. I stood in the depression and I called Dale. "I need you to do me a favor," I said. "Are you off today?" "Yes." "I need you to search the state historical database for a town plat associated with Toulon, Nevada, pre-1950. Dale was quiet for a moment. "This is about those calls. You found them too?" "I found them 4 years ago, Allison. There were 8 then." I didn't say anything. I stood in the depression and looked at the Humboldt Sink stretching out flat and pale and dead to the south, and I listened to Dale breathe on the other end of the line. "I classified them the same way everyone else did," he said, "because the procedure is correct. There is no address. There is no structure. The field unit finds nothing. Equipment error is the appropriate code. You don't believe it's equipment error. What I believe is not a field on the form. Dale, I'll look for the plat." He called me back that evening. He'd found it. Not in the state database. That only goes back to 1970 for unincorporated communities. He found it in the University of Nevada, near Reno, Special Collections Digital Archive, a town plat for Toulon, Nevada, filed in 1907 by the Nevada Copper Belt Mining Company, a full grid. Streets named Uranium, Mill, Copper, Paiute, Shaft, and Company. Approximately 40 lots, a main street, a company store location, a school lot, a mining town, built in 1907 for a copper and uranium prospect that operated until 1921, when the mine closed. The town was abandoned gradually through the 1920s. By 1930, the census recorded 0 population. The structures were salvaged for lumber and materials through the 1930s and 1940s. By 1950, aerial photographs show nothing but open desert. Dale read me the street names from the plat. Uranium Street ran north-south. Mill Street ran east-west. Their intersection was approximately where the rectangular depression is. "Feature 14 Uranium Street," I said. "If the lot numbering followed standard company town convention, number 14 would be on the east side, 3rd lot from the mill intersection." That's where she was calling from. "That is the address she gave, yes." "Dale, there is no building there." "I know. There hasn't been a building there in 70 years. "I know, Allison." "Then who is calling us?" Dale didn't answer that. What he said was, "I'm going to send you the plat. Overlay it on the GIS, match the addresses from the call logs to the lot numbers, see if they correspond to actual structures." I did this the next afternoon. I'm not a GIS technician, but our mapping software allows basic overlay work, and the 1907 plat, once geo-referenced against modern survey points, aligned with disturbing precision. And every address from the 14 calls corresponded to a platted lot. The structure fire at 14 Uranium was on a lot designated residential worker housing on the 1907 plat. The medical emergency at 7 Mill was on a lot designated residential foreman. The missing child report at 3 Paiute was adjacent to the lot marked school. I printed the overlay. I put it in the folder with the call logs. I drove to the center and waited for Dale's shift to start, and I showed him. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "Check the state archive for fire and medical records." From 1907? From whenever they exist. I should explain something about Nevada's record keeping in the early 20th century. Mining towns were transient by nature. Many of them existed for less than a decade. County services were sparse. Pershing County was only created in 1919, carved from Humboldt County, which means records from Toulon's operational period may be split across 2 county systems, neither of which digitized anything before 1995. State vital records from that era are incomplete. Mining company records, when they survived at all, are in private collections or university archives. But fire records, I learned, are different. Nevada's State Fire Marshal Office was established in 1917, and one of its first mandates was to collect structural fire reports from every municipality and unincorporated area, including mining camps. This archive has been partially digitized. It is searchable by location, date, and outcome. I found it on a Wednesday afternoon, sitting in my apartment on my laptop, on the State Fire Marshal's historical database. October 14th, 1919. Toulon, Nevada. Structure fire, residential, 14 Uranium Street. Cause, subfloor ignition, probable electrical fault in mine run wiring. Occupants, 1 adult female, 3 children, ages 4, 6, 9. Response, none. Nearest fire service, Lovelock, approximately 40 miles. Outcome, total loss, 4 fatalities. I read it twice, then I read it again. I pulled up the call log from our first Toulon call, the one Dale had taken, the woman with the smoke, and the 3 children under 10. She had said the smoke smelled chemical and sweet, not like wood. She had said it was coming through the seams in the floorboards. She had said the wiring was bad. She had said she'd been telling someone about it for months. She had given us her address. She had described the emergency accurately. She'd asked for the fire department. In 1919, the fire department was 40 miles away, and there was no telephone system in Toulon, and no one came, and 4 people died. In 2024, a 911 call arrived from an address that hasn't existed since 1930, describing an emergency that happened in 1919. And a dispatcher took the call and sent a deputy who found nothing, and the call was classified as an equipment error. I pulled the other 13 calls. Over the next 4 days, working on my days off, I matched 7 of them to historical records. The medical emergency at 7 Mill Street, a mine foreman named Arthur Keel died of a heart attack in January 1920. His wife was listed as a survivor. The domestic disturbance at 11 Copper Street, A 1918 report in the Lovelock Review Minor noted a stabbing at a Toulon residence. The victim survived, when the assailant was never charged. The missing child at 3 Paiute. I couldn't find a direct record, but the school enrollment records from 1916 available through the University Archive listed a student named George Nakai, age 8, with a home address of 3 Paiute Street, and the 1917 enrollment records did not include his name. 7 matches. 7 emergencies that happened between 1916 and 1921. 7 calls to a 911 system that wouldn't exist for another 60 years, requesting help from agencies that weren't there, giving addresses that were correct at the time of the emergency and have been correct at no time since. The remaining 7 calls I could not match because the records don't exist. This does not mean the emergencies didn't happen, it means the records didn't survive. Mining towns in 1920 did not have comprehensive incident documentation. People died and were buried, and their deaths were noted in a company ledger or a family Bible or nowhere at all. I brought everything to Dale. He read through the folder in silence. It took him about 40 minutes. He drank 2 cups of coffee. When he finished, he closed the folder and set it on the console and said, "Who else have you told?" "No one." "Don't. Dale, I'm not saying this because I think you're wrong. I'm saying this because I think you're right. And there is no version of right that anyone with authority will accept. You will be telling them that a dead mining town is calling 911. You will be providing historical documentation. They will see a dispatcher who has been on overnight shift for 11 years, having a psychological episode, and they will take you off the board. And the calls will keep coming. And someone else will classify them as equipment error. That's not acceptable. Alice and I classified them as equipment error for 4 years. This is the moment I need you to understand. Not the calls, not the dead town, not the fire that killed us woman and 3 children in 1919. The moment that actually matters is this. Dale Reeves, who is the most procedurally correct human being I have ever worked with, a man who has never once, in 6 years, deviated from protocol. This man found these calls 4 years before I did, recognized the pattern, and chose to do nothing. Not out of cowardice, not out of laziness, out of a clear-eyed understanding that the system we work in has no form to receive this information. There is no dispatch code for a call from 1919. There is no resource to send. There is no protocol for an emergency that has already happened. The calls are real, the voices are real, the information is accurate, the distress is genuine. But the system's only available response is to send a unit to a location that does not exist, confirm that no emergency is in progress, and close the event. And Dale, for 4 years, did exactly that. Every time one of these calls came in, he dispatched a unit, the unit found nothing, and he classified it as equipment error. He did this because it was the only correct thing the system allowed him to do. He also did it, and this is what I saw in his face when he told me, because each time he dispatched a unit, he was, in some sense, answering the call. He was sending help. The help arrived 100 years too late and found nothing to save. Yes, but it was dispatched. I asked him why he didn't tell me. He said, because then you would have to decide what to do about it, and I already know there's nothing to do. I went home. I sat with the folder. I thought about the woman at 14 Uranium Street who called 911 in October. our October, this October, on to report smoke in her house, and who described her children and gave her address and waited for help that was dispatched and could not arrive because her house has been gone for 100 years, and the fire that killed her has been over for 100 years, and she is dead, and her children are dead, and they died because there was no fire department within 40 miles in 1919 and no telephone in the town and no way to call for help. And now there is a way to call for help. Now there are telephones and 911 centers and dispatchers sitting in windowless rooms 24 hours a day, and the calls are coming through, and we are answering them, and we are sending deputies who find nothing, and we are closing the events, and the calls keep coming. I went back to the archive. I searched more broadly, not just Toulon, but every unincorporated location in Pershing County. I searched for calls with addresses that don't resolve in GIS. I filtered for events classified as equipment error. I found 43 more, scattered across the county, scattered across the last 11 years, which is as far back as our digital archive extends. Addresses in places that are not places anymore. Rosebud, Oriana, Antelope Springs, Willard, Star City. Mining towns, railroad towns, way stations, is places that had names and streets and people and fires and heart attacks and missing children and then emptied out and fell down and were forgotten. 43 calls from the dead grid of Pershing County, Nevada. I mapped them. Every call corresponded to a historical settlement. I could not verify every emergency against a historical record. The records are too fragmentary. But where records existed, the calls matched. An 1887 diphtheria case in Star City matched a medical call describing a child who couldn't breathe. An 1898 mine collapse near Rosebud matched a call reporting someone trapped under debris. A 1912 range fire near Oriana matched a call reporting grass fire approaching structures. And in every case, dispatched, unable to locate, equipment error. I want to be clear about something. I am not a historian, or I am not a paranormal investigator. I am not someone who seeks out mystery or believes easily in things that can't be measured. I am a 911 dispatcher. I answer phones and send help. That is my entire function. But I am now sitting in a room every night where phones ring from towns that are no longer there, carrying emergencies that are 100 years old, and I am classifying them as equipment errors because the system gives me no other option, and I am going to tell you what I have not told Dale, which is what happened on the 23rd of November. It was a slow night. 1 DU. I stop on I-80, one medical transport from the care facility in Lovelock. Dale was at his console. I was at mine. At 3:11 a.m., my board lit up. Incoming 911. I answered. Pershing County 911, what is your emergency? Silence. Then breathing. Then a woman's voice. Not the woman from 14 Uranium, a different voice. Older, rougher, tired. There's been an accident at the mill, she said. My husband. They brought him home. His arm's torn up bad. I can't stop the bleeding. Ma'am, what is your address? 12 Company Street, Toulon. I felt it in my chest. Not fear, recognition. The way you recognize a song you've been hearing through a wall for weeks, and someone finally opens the door. Ma'am, I'm going to dispatch medical assistance. Can you describe the injury? His left arm, below the elbow, the machinery, something caught. There's bone showing. I've got a tourniquet on it, but it's soaking through. Her voice was steady, practiced. The voice of a woman who's dealt with injuries before in a mining town in 1918 or 1919, and where the nearest doctor was in Lovelock and the road was 40 miles of unpaved desert. "Ma'am, can you keep pressure on the tourniquet?" "I'm keeping pressure. He's conscious. He's asking for water." "Should I give him water?" I almost answered. I almost said small sips, only because that is what we say, that is the standard instruction for a conscious trauma patient. I almost provided medical guidance to a woman who has been dead for a century about a man whose arm was torn in a mill that closed in 1921. Instead, I said, "Ma'am, help is on the way." I dispatched Pershing County EMS to the Toulon area. They found nothing. The call disconnected after 12 minutes. I classified it as equipment error. And then I went into the bathroom at the end of the hall, the only room in the building with a lock. And I sat on the floor and I put my hands on my face and I cried. Not because I was frightened, because I told her help was on the way. Because that is what I am trained to say, and it is always true. And for the first time in 11 years, I said it, and it was a lie. Help was not on the way. Help was never going to arrive. Help cannot arrive 100 years late to a house that is a rectangular depression in the alkali and a name on a mining company plat. But she asked. She called. Somehow, and I do not have an explanation, and I am not going to fabricate one, she called and she was afraid, and she was competent, and she was holding a tourniquet on her husband's shattered arm, and she asked if she should give him water. And I was the person on the other end of the line. I told Dale the next night, and not about the crying, about the call. He checked his own records. He'd had 3 more Toulon calls since I started looking. He'd classified them all as equipment error. "They're increasing," I said. "They've been increasing since I first noticed them." "How often?" 4 years ago, maybe one every 2 or 3 months. Now it's weekly, sometimes twice a week. "From Toulon?" "From everywhere." I had a call last week from an address in Star City. A woman reporting her husband hadn't come home from the mine. Star City's been empty since 1868. I looked at him. He looked at the console. "Dale, what happens if we stop classifying them as equipment errors?" "We don't have another classification." "We could create one." "No, we couldn't. The CAD codes are state level. We don't have local modification authority. And even if we did, Allison, what code would you create? Historical emergency, temporal displacement, call from deceased? I don't know. Neither do I, and that's why they stay as equipment errors, because the system has a hole in it exactly the shape of this, and the only thing the hole allows is for the call to fall through. I've been sitting with this for 4 months now. I have a folder that is now a box. I have printouts of call logs, historical records, plat maps, census data, fire marshal reports, newspaper clippings, and a hand-drawn overlay of every dead town in Pershing County that has generated a 911 call. There are 19 towns. The calls are coming faster. Last week I logged 11 in a single shift. Dale logged 8. Different towns, different emergencies, different decades. A drowning in a reservoir that was drained in 1934. A house collapse during a storm in a town that washed away in 1927. A woman in labor at an address in Willard that hasn't existed since the railroad rerouted in 1911. I answer every call, I provide instructions, I dispatch units. The units find nothing. I classify the events as equipment error. I do this because it is my job, and because the calls are real to the person making them, and because a woman with a tourniquet on her husband's arm deserves to hear help is on the way, even if the help cannot reach her, even if the help has never been able to reach her. even if the reason she is calling now on a system that didn't exist when she was alive is that she has been trying to call for 100 years and the phone only just started ringing. I don't believe in ghosts. I want to be clear about that. I don't think there are spirits in the desert making phone calls. I think there are emergencies that were never answered. And I think the act of not being answered has a weight. And I think that weight has been sitting in the alkali and the sagebrush for 100 years. And I think our system, our phones, our towers, our CAD maps, our consoles, is finally sensitive enough to pick it up. Not because the dead are calling, because the emergency never ended, because no one ever came, because the fire at 14 Uranium Street is still burning for the woman who died in it, because the mill worker's arm is still bleeding for the wife who held the tourniquet, because the child at 3 Paiute Street is still missing for the mother who reported it. And they have been waiting in the only posture the dying know, which is to call for help and wait. And we are the ones who are finally hearing it. 2 weeks ago, I was on shift alone. Dale had called out sick, first time in 6 years. And the board was quiet. And then it wasn't. 9 calls came in over 40 minutes. All from Toulon. All from addresses on the 1907 plat. Different houses, different emergencies, different voices. I handled them sequentially because that is what you do. You triage, you prioritize, you take the most urgent call first and work down. A structure fire. A child with fever. A man with chest pain. A woman reporting someone at her door, a child who'd fallen and couldn't move his legs. I was taking notes and dispatching units to a place that doesn't exist, and the calls were stacking, and I was working the board the way I've worked it for 11 years, and it was the busiest shift I'd ever had, and every caller was dead. I dispatched to all of them. I gave medical instructions. I told a woman to cool her child's fever with wet cloths. I told a man to chew an aspirin. I told a mother to keep her child still and not move his neck. I did this because it is what I am trained to do, and because it is what they needed, and because the alternative is to let the phone ring. When the shift ended, I had 9 events in the log, all classified as equipment error, and I drove home, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment complex, and I understood something I hadn't understood before. I am the fire department that was 40 miles away. I am the doctor who wasn't in Toulon. I am the help that didn't come. 100 years later, the system finally exists. The lines finally connect. And I'm on the other end, and I can hear them, and I can talk to them, and I cannot save them. I can only answer. Last night, a new call came in. Not from Toulon. Not from any mining town in my files. The address was 3118 Vine Street, Lovelock. That is my mother's house. The house I grew up in. The house that's still there, on Vine Street, with a new family living in it. The caller was a woman. She was crying. She said there was a man in the house, and he wouldn't leave, and the children were upstairs, and she needed someone to come right now. The callback number, when I looked at it, was a number I recognized. It was my mother's landline number. The number we had when I was a child. The number that was disconnected in 2003 when my mother moved to Reno. I sat very still. I listened to the woman crying, and I recognized her voice. Not from a historical record, not from a fire marshal database, not from a century-old plat map. I recognized her voice because it was my mother's voice, and she was 31 years old, and I was upstairs with my brother, and the man in the house was my father. I dispatched a unit. The deputy drove to 3118 Vine Street and found a quiet house with the porch light on and a family asleep inside and nothing wrong. He cleared the call. I classified it as equipment error. I sat at my console for the remaining 3 hours of my shift. I did not tell Dale because Dale was not there. I have not told anyone. I am writing this instead because I need it to be in a form that a system can hold, even though I know that no system can hold it. My mother left my father in 1996. She took me and my brother to Reno and filed for divorce, and never spoke about what happened in the house on Vine Street. I was 8. My brother was 6. I remember the drive to Reno. I do not remember what we were driving away from. I've never remembered. My mother, when I've asked, says only, it was time to leave. But now I know. I know because I heard her call for help at 31 from a number that hasn't worked in 22 years, from a house that still stands but is no longer ours. And her voice was the voice of a woman who was afraid and had children upstairs and needed someone to come. And no one came. Not in 1996. No one came because she didn't call. She didn't call because I don't know why she didn't call. And because it was 1996 and she was ashamed, or she thought she could handle it, or she didn't think it was bad enough, or she was protecting us from what a call would set in motion. I don't know. She didn't call. But the emergency happened. And the emergency that is not answered, I have now come to understand, does not end. It sits in the walls of the place where it happened, and it waits. And when the system is finally sensitive enough, when the phones are good enough, the towers close enough, the consoles staffed by someone patient enough to listen, the call comes through. And it came through to me. I am going to continue working the overnight shift. I am going to continue answering calls from Toulon and Star City and Rosebud and Oriana and Willard and every other dead town in this county where someone once needed help and didn't get it. Ria, I am going to continue classifying them as equipment error because the system requires it. I am going to continue dispatching units that find nothing because the procedure requires it. And I'm going to call my mother tomorrow. Not to ask her what happened, not to make her remember, just to tell her that someone finally answered. I don't know if that counts. I don't know if hearing an emergency 100 years late or 30 years late, or even 1 second late, changes anything for the person who lived through it alone. I don't know if the woman at 14 Uranium Street felt anything when I said help was on the way. I don't know if my mother will feel anything when I call. But the phone rang, and I was there, and I answered it. That is my job. That is the whole job. You sit in the room and you wait, and when it rings, you answer. It's ringing now. It's always been ringing. I just couldn't hear it before.